So welcome to Adobe Dimensions. If you've taken a few of my other courses where I talk a little bit about Adobe Dimensions and you already know the basics, feel free to skip the next 20 minutes. I'm going to do a little bit of a crash course here with the basics, and of course Adobe Dimension has added a lot of upgrades and different features since the last time I've talked about it. So feel free to watch and see if you can learn something new, even if you're already familiar with some of the basics. So the first thing you're going to notice when you pop onto the dashboard is you're going to notice a couple of things. On the left are going to be a series of tools where you can rotate and move your 3D objects, and we'll go over the difference between a lot of these different tools because it can be a little overwhelming if you've never worked in the 3D space before. And we're going to talk about the X-axis, the Y, and the Z, and how it's really a lot more simple than you think. This is not a very intimidating 3D program. This is great if you've never worked in a 3D program before because it is so basic compared to something like a Blender or a Cinema 4D where there's thousands of 3D tools. This is very stripped down. You just have the toolbar on the left. You have some assets on this panel right here. And then you have a couple other options on the right about your canvas size and all of your different layers as well. So scene is basically setting the scene. This is all about setting 3D objects together to create all sorts of amazing scenes. And this is kind of the term that they use. But this is very similar to layers if you were in Photoshop. So this is kind of where all of your layers happen when you put in when you drag in a 3D object. So let's go ahead and drag in a cone. Just clicking and dragging, and so you'll see your cone pop up right there in the scene, and then you can go right into this arrow and it's going to allow you to edit that particular layer. So scene, layers, kind of very similar if you're used to the other Adobe programs. So let's drag in another 3D object and we're going to kind of see how this 3D space works. So let's just drag in a simple cube. So we're just going to click and drag and put it anywhere into the plane. So this is called the plane, everything that you see the gridded lines on. This is your main plane. So we're just going to pop it anywhere right here in the middle, and there's our cube. So immediately you are presented with this kind of series of different arrows and options and squares, and this is how we're going to scale our object, but we're also going to be able to rotate it and move it along the plane. So the very first thing is this little black dot in the middle. If you click and hold, you'll be able to scale it and move it along the plane, whatever plane that you have set. So that one's pretty straightforward. It's clicking on the center and you'll be able to move that object around. Then you'll notice a series of red, green, and also blue objects. And so the colors go with what plane or axes it's going on. So the blue will be the Z-axis, and the red will be the X-axis, and the green will be the Y-axis. So if I click on the top arrow, the arrows are going to be moving the object in the 3D space. So I can move it up. I'm going to click over here and slide it on the X-axis, and I can also click on the arrow and slide it this way. So think of arrows as movement up and down into the 3D space. So now we have the center object to be able to move it along the plane or the environment. And then we have the arrows that move it on the different axes. So up, down, left, right into the 3D space. And then lastly, we have rotating. So we can rotate our 3D object. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this Y arrow. I'm just going to move it up a little bit so I can kind of show you the cube rotating a little bit. So now the circles are for rotating. So you can kind of see how when I move over to the circles, you're seeing that 3D axes. So let's do X, click and hold, and you can rotate it along the X axis all the way around. And we can also do it on the Z, so it's going to do it this direction, and then also on the Y. So you can turn it around. So you can see with all of this combined, you can pretty much move your object around the entire space really easily by just using these controls right here. And another option I want to talk about is the squares. So we have the circles, which is rotating. We have the arrows, which is moving. But we also want to be able to scale it to make it smaller or bigger compared to other objects. So that's going to be your squares. So we're going to go ahead and scale it on the Z axis. And I'm just kind of moving my mouse left and right and I'm able to scale it up and down. And I can scale it, since it's a cube, it's going to scale the same no matter what axes I scale it on. Lower or bigger and smaller. So let's try a different object. Let's bring in a torus, which I guess is pretty much a ring. And we can move this up, over, forward. So that was just using my arrows. And now we can move the entire thing around the plane like this by just clicking the center. And then the squares, we know, will make it bigger and smaller. And then lastly, we have our circles, which rotates the object. So it's not so intimidating once you practice which one is which. So circles are rotation, squares is scaling, and then arrows is moving.